make the bread from start. Are you filming me now? Craig? Okay. We're going to put on record the sourdough bread process. First of all, you've got to start off with a deisket, which is seasoned and just scraped before it's dried before the next use. Doesn't work out so good when it's damp, so to put another batch right behind the first batch is not too good. But I usually start off with having some old dry bread from the last batch. And oh, maybe about that much. It would be like about a half a loaf. And I break it up into the barrel, and then I'm going to soak it. And I think it could stand even a little more. In fact, it looks like I can use about everything I've accumulated since the last baking. And then I soak that up with either cold or warm water. Fill up enough water to cover the bread. But being that the deisket is probably shrunk up from drying, it'll leak water. So this process also has the opportunity of allowing the barrel to swell up again. And I'm going to leave that set now until it's soaked. Okay, now we've let the dry bread soak, and it's soft now, just in the water. And the next thing I put in then is 2.5 pounds of rye meal. Now it's rye meal. It is not rye flour as such, because rye flour is ground too fine and it won't give you the texture that we're looking for. So I've got 2.5 pounds of rye meal here, and that I'll just pour right in, right over the soaked dry bread. The soaked dry bread, by the way, is not necessarily necessary. It's just what my mother did, and I just figured that whether she was trying to conserve and not throw away the old bread, or that it had something to do with the process of souring, I can't tell you, but that's what I do. And then on top of that, I put 4 cups of oatmeal, which is just the regular Quaker Oats old-fashioned oatmeal. And I just put in 4 heaping cups. Sometimes I put in a little more. In this case, I think this box holds just 4 cups. So really I put in a whole box, which actually is 18 ounces of oatmeal. The next thing I put in is caraway seed, and in this case I put in 4 cans, but actually it comes to, it's about 1.5 cups of caraway seed. And I kind of grind that in, just take a handful of it and kind of rub it a little bit, which is supposedly brings out the aroma a little more. And so I put in the entire amount, which is about 1.5 cups. Now, sometimes I add another item, which is a Russian, I think it's called charmeuse. I'll show it to you in a minute. I don't even know where it comes from, except I got it from Will Levine. Why don't you cut for me? Okay, this is the charmeuse. It's a black little tiny seed, and I just put a couple of pinches of it in because it's very strong. But if you use just a little of it, it has a nice aroma. Now, why don't you cut again? Now, the salt I put in is a coarse salt, and I put in a heaping handful. As you can notice, that's it. Now, the only thing lacking here in this first operation, which is to make the slurry, is the yeast and additional water. And I'll do that in a few moments. And I use the equivalent of one small cake of yeast, or a third of this size. And I don't know exactly what the, let's see, I believe this is 2 ounces net weight. So I'd be using a third of that. And I'll dissolve that in water, and I'll go ahead and do that now. Are you cutting? Or? Okay. Okay, now I'm dividing the yeast into 3 cubes, and 1 cube is going to go in. That's what I'm going to dissolve, and another cube is going to go in here. And the third cube, being that I have so much, I'll put in the garbage disposal because that's great for the septic tank. This is great. I'm going to rise. Okay, now handling the yeast is pretty important, so you don't kill it. We don't want to have a change of temperature. So I get the water to what would be considered a room temperature. And when I can't feel any temperature to it at all, then I know the water is at room temperature. And I kind of chop up the yeast. And I dissolve the yeast in the water, so there's no chunks at all. I don't know if it makes any difference, but this is the way I've been doing it. And then I'll just pour it right in. Now you can add the yeast just about any time, actually. It doesn't have to be in any particular cycle. In fact, all these ingredients can be added anything first. The only thing you want to watch is that you don't forget anything in total. Now I've gotten all the yeast in there now, and now I will just add water and mix. And I add water until it gets the right feel. And the feel is kind of a loose slurry. And being that there's oatmeal in here, after the water sets a little bit, it does expand and get a little thicker. As you can see here now, this is a very heavy slurry now, and it's really too heavy, and I'm going to add some more water. And actually, my control of water is not that good. I just get a feel of what I think is right. And because after the souring process, when I add more flour later, I will be able to correct the amount of moisture. by just adding a little more flour, a little less flour, whichever the case might be. But right now the slurry is still too heavy, and I'm going to loosen it a little more. I think this is probably about it now. I must have about enough, but it's still a little heavy. Still a little heavy. But if you can see what it looks like, you can kind of get the feel of how heavy it is. But I'd say it's about right now. I try and mix it thoroughly so, if nothing else, the yeast gets well distributed. And we'll see how it works up here. Yeah, that feels about right. And that's it. Now this is all that's really done to this point. From now on, this is now a Friday night. I'll let this sour now on a warm spot until Sunday morning. So that actually is really, I'll let it set on the warm spot until Saturday night, which is then tonight and tomorrow. And then on Saturday night I'll take it off of the warm spot and just put it in a room temperature spot, which will then I feel be the proper amount of souring. I don't get a consistent souring. Sometimes it's sourer than other times. And but what I'm doing now, if you'll notice, I'm setting it over the pilot on the stove, which does put off a little bit of heat and kind of takes care of it. And then I'll put a towel over it to keep the moisture in, so it doesn't dry off, and this will ferment and sour. Now I won't look at this again till tomorrow night. This means then we're talking about a matter of in this particular warmth, we're talking about 24 hours to even 30 hours of time, at which time then we'll take it off of the heat and let it another 8 or 10 hours or 12 hours even until I make the bread, which will be on Sunday morning. So we'll cut for now, and we'll be back on film on Sunday morning. Okay, now when we last left off, we had put the bread to sour, and now it's Sunday morning, and the slurry has fermented and soured to as much as it's going to. And so now we have to add some more ingredients. By the way, I wanted to mention, when you're working with a dough and you naturally scrub up beforehand, being that you're washing nowadays with detergent, I don't know what effect detergent particles could have on the action of yeast and so forth and so on. So I make very, very sure that after I've washed my hands with soap or detergent, I definitely really rinse them. I mean, so that I feel that the pores of my skin have released any soap substance, which I'm sure a chemical from washing your hands could affect something. I'm imagining that at least. Anyway, now what I've done since I took the bread out, the slurry is there. I took an additional pound of rye meal, and I've put that in now because now I'm adding dry flours, and this is the rye meal I put in. I also put in already a cup and a half of graham. This is not a requirement, but it adds a nice flavor, and it I think does something to the texture of the bread also. And I used a cup and a half of this. It's just plain stone ground graham flour. And the additional thing I do is, if you'll notice later, or you will notice later when we're working the bread, that you've always got some white flour laying on your board after you're all through, and I don't throw that away. It's lumpy and so forth, so that I can't put it into the back into the flour bag or the flour package, but I put it right back into my next batch of bread. It's just kind of a continuing thing. I feel where we're saving any odd dried up pieces of bread. I also save the flour that wasn't used on the last batch. Now what we've got in here is the original mixture, and so far I've added an additional now a pound of rye meal and a cup and a half of graham. And the only other flours now that are going into this, I've also added the old flour I had, if I had any, is white flour. And we use an unbleached general purpose flour. And if you're going to get ready to bake, you should provide yourself with at least 10 pounds. Depending on how much water you used in making up the slurry originally, would depend on how much flour you're going to need to get the consistency where you want it. So you have to start off with 10 pounds. I usually don't use anything near that anymore, but that's what it is. Okay, now I'm going to add, not knowing how much white flour I'm going to need, I'm going to put in a batch of white flour, let's say just, you know, about probably a pound or 2 pounds. Well, I'd probably put in a half a bag here, for example. Okay, now the only additional ingredient that must go in is Mazola oil. And I used, we're talking about was the next ingredient we have to add, and the final ingredient, other than flour, is Mazola oil. And I use just a regular corn oil. And I use a kind of a full cup, and just naturally just work that into the mixture. The necessity of the oil is to it makes the bread handle after the bread is complete, and you're cutting it or eating it. Well, first of all, it's 100%. Necessary, or I should say it makes it 100% easier to get the bread out of the pan when the oil's in there. I don't have to oil my pans at all because the oil seems to take care of it. Also, the oil it seems to make it easier to cut. I think it holds the bread together so it isn't crumbly and so forth. Now, what I'm doing here is starting to knead the mixture, the slurry, along with the dry flour that I've just added. And it appears that I might have already put in too much white flour because it seems a little stiff. But we'll see as we get a mixture going here. Now, there's no real problem if you put in a little bit too much flour, or you overestimated what you thought you should have, because it's all we have to do is add just a little bit of water to. Well, actually, the kneading process that I use is probably the same as anyone would, but I just take a fist and push to the bottom. And after I've done this a while, I might take down and scoop under just to make sure that I'm getting all the dry flour down in the corners and so forth, and just start kneading again. At this particular point, I know that I've already, I'm too dry. And this is unusual. Normally I've got enough Are you in? I'm going to add a little bit of water now. As I think I mentioned that it's unusual for me. Usually I have more moisture in the slurry, and don't usually have to correct with water. It's usually just a matter of adding more flour to pick up the extra moisture. But I've had that situation happen a few times, and when I add water it doesn't mean a thing. The actual process of kneading should be to a point where it's pretty smooth, and it should take probably as much as 10 to 15 minutes of kneading to get the bind and to get the all the textures running in the same direction, which kneading is really doing. So that process should take about 10 minutes, and there's no sense in filming that. I'll just continue to. Well, now we've kneaded enough, and you can see the smoothness and the way the fibers are just kind of hanging together. That means that it's properly kneaded at this point and ready to be set for the first raising. Stop. Now that I've scraped all the dough off my hands, and now I'm going to set it up for raising. And I'm putting it back on a very light, warm situation over the pilot light on the stove. But any warm place will work, and it's just a matter of how long it takes to raise. And I seem to have a varied timing. Sometimes it'll raise just a little bit, no matter how long I leave it, maybe a couple inches in the barrel, and other times it might raise over the barrel. It depends, I suppose, on the humidity and how active the yeast is, and so forth. But I'm satisfied if I get a noticeable raise. In other words, if I get a couple 3 inches, I'd be happy with that, and consider that the first raising of the bread, because actually we're going to have 3 raisings of the bread. But at this point now, it's just going to be set up here until it has noticeably raised, and then we'll go into cutting it into loaves and so forth for a second raising, and then putting it into the pans for the third raising.